Hello. On this week's show, I talked to Jared Ball of Bear Home Inspections. We go over some things to be on the lookout for, specifically in the Pacific Northwest during a home inspection that could save you thousands of dollars. We also get into why you should always get a home inspection with new construction. And we talk about some of the things we've seen, some horror stories out in the field that you might want to be on the lookout for as well. Hey, look, if we haven't met before, my name's Doug Varenas. I'm a licensed real estate agent in Washington and Oregon. And if you think we might be a good fit to work together, buying, selling, or investing here, please click the link to in the description below to schedule a 100% free, no pressure chat where you can get all your questions answered and all the information you need to make the best decision for you. And even if you're looking to buy or sell in another state, I have a vast network of vetted resources that I can hook you up with to get that accomplished. So thanks for watching, and let's get into the show. My guest today is Jared Ball. He's the owner and operator of Bear Home Inspections and an all-around great guy. We've done a number of deals, and he always does a great job. And so welcome to the show, Jared. I appreciate it. I appreciate having you on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah. So let the viewers know how you got into home inspection originally.
Yeah, it's funny because I used to be a carpenter. I was, a lot of my working experience was through construction, and I worked really hard at getting to where I was in construction. I journeyed out as a journeyman carpenter, and it was right at that point where I started experiencing some knee issues, primarily some osteoarthritis, and that was very much job related. If you can imagine, carrying 60 pounds of tools on your person and then going up and down ladders, working on your knees, it's just, my legs kind of took a toll. During that time, I was really into long distance running. That was kind of my outlet, just to kind of burn off steam, especially steam from the job sites. But it eventually got to a point where I had a couple surgeries. The smart people said, listen, kid, you've got no business in construction anymore. Your knees look pretty bad. In fact, looking at those joints specifically, you look like you're in your 60s, not your 30s. And so what we're looking at is just the ultimate lack of cartilage in between, the bones in the knee. And so it was kind of a shock because I was planning on just staying within carpentry and other residential services for the rest of my career until it was time to retire. So how do you take that information when your joy and your passion and all of your experiences in construction? And so I ended up dabbling around just to put some food on the table, just taking jobs here and there and taking it easier on my body. And I thought, you know what, I'm qualified to sit in a crane. Why not just take what I know about construction and apply that to moving boxes, all around the job site? And you might as well, use my experience with some of the contractors and the supervisors in our area. And so I looked into that. There's a really interesting, really cool program over here in Woodland, Washington, that trains people to become a great heavy machinery operators, and they had a crane program. And I remember the recruiter, she sat me down and she goes, Jared, I know your type. You're not a crane operator. And I'm thinking, are you a recruiter? I have $16,000 here. Take my money. I want to get to work. And she goes, no. You're very, you can tell you're very people oriented. You like working with people, and there's other ways that you can take your experience and apply that into something else. And so I was like, okay, tell me more. And she goes, have you thought about home inspections? I thought, yeah, I've thought about it. Absolutely not. Because for a carpenter, inspectors, engineers, and architects are kind of our mortal enemies. We work with them quite a bit just to get the job done, but they certainly, they don't make our job any easier. In fact, there's a lot of conversations, or I guess you can call professional arguments, that happen on the job site when you apply what looks good on the blueprint and how things actually get assembled. And so, I thought absolutely not. And she goes, well, I'm not talking about county or city inspectors. I'm talking about private. When someone's interested in buying a house or maintaining a house or just wanting to know what the condition of their house is, that's where you could step in with your experience. And I still shook it off. Like, absolutely not. It doesn't sound like a good fit for me. But something she said was just ringing around in my ears for the rest of the evening, and I couldn't sleep. So 3 in the morning, I jumped on the computer, and I think it was by 7 o'clock in the morning, I already came up with the full business plan. And it was just a few weeks later, I got it all, kind of squared away. I took
Wait,
some
what did she
time off
say?
to,
What did she say that was
it was just,
that
it
you were?
was
It was
just
just
in,
that just everything.
yeah, it was just some information about like why I would be a good home inspector in regard to the information that I have and the experience and overall just my passion from building and just building sciences. And, at that time, it was kind of a risk because at that time I was not interested in could be's. I needed to get straight to work. Like I needed to be able to provide. But looking more and more and more into it late at night, it made more sense. She definitely knew what she was talking about. Uh,
Because you could have just worked for an inspection company. So what was the impetus, or like why did you choose to go into business? I'm always interested to hear about that journey. Like what made you decide to start your own inspection business versus like just being
That's a great question. My wife always wanted me to start my own construction company. And I thought, oh, gosh, that would be another project. I'm a guy who has too many hobbies. I have too many things and projects that happen that pop up. And I actually was interested in eliminating a lot of the things that I do with my hands and with my time because I wanted to live within simplicity. But, she says, no, you would always be a good business owner. And I felt like I needed more organization skills in order to take on something like that. But no, I liked the idea of just working for myself. I liked the idea of going above and beyond and not being told how I'm going to do my job or when I need to do something. Ultimately, I think that's where it landed. I come before construction, I had quite a bit of customer service, time in customer service. And if you have visited a job yard, there's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of that on a construction site. Not to throw any shade on construction workers, but we are pretty much close to cavemen. And
You know what? And all the like plumbers and HVAC people and all the other business owners, like that's the biggest Achilles heel, I feel like, is just the ability to interact and like get back to people, like answer the
communication.
phone. Communication is huge. And I don't get it because these people could be doing gangbusters. And the people I use are like, really good communicators or the best out of the cavemen, I guess. But yeah, that's such a barrier and such a good point to realize. It is an imperative that a business like yours communicates well. And I don't understand why more people don't realize that. I don't get it.
We often hear the phrase communication is key. It really is. Whether you are building a house, building a deck, building a business, or just relationships, and that's all this is. It's just relationships, building good relationships. That all requires not just communication, but good communication.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wanted to really kind of soar on that. I wanted to take what I have learned through customer service and how to serve people and how to help people along with my knowledge of building sciences. That's kind of where I felt like I was going to be able to fit into this
Mm-hmm.
in home inspection. So, after starting it up, as with any startup business, it takes time. You got to build the trust along with the relationships, and you got to introduce yourself and explain to people what your value is. And I was not really into like the typical showman type. Like I can promise you this and this. I kind of started off showing people what I can do instead of talking about what I can do. And a lot of that, it was kind of risky, but a lot of that was kind of free work. And I've always been cautioned. We all have been cautioned, don't do anything for free. But how do you convince anyone in business, your values and your principles and your qualities if they can't see it? That's kind of a risk to trust. Like from a real estate agent point of view, it's kind of a risk to trust your client with someone you've never really met, you've never really seen the way they operate and how they handle a very delicate process.
Right. Well, I think it was that communication, though, was the foundation, because we met at a real estate investors meeting where we were just like chatting about, whatever. And I appreciated the fact that you came to this investors meeting because it was just it's a variety of people, and it was obvious you were there to like, make those connections, but it was definitely not in a salesy way. It was just, introducing yourself, providing that value proposition for people, and it just seemed really natural, and that's why I definitely started using you as just that communication, and that I appreciated the hustle of showing up to that event and getting to know people. And so, yeah, it's relationships for sure.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
it was pretty easy because that event is actually a really cool event. That group, it's really easy to find good people in that group, and that investors network is actually a great place to be when it comes to just meeting people, not just professionals. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, it was really easy. But yeah, it was cool to meet you there.
Yeah. And business is booming. You're doing residential and commercial. And so, one of the things that I appreciate about your inspection style is that it's very educational for the buyer. So, a lot of times I feel like it's a passive thing. And at the end, you get a report, and then, I'll go through it, or you'll go through it a little bit, or the inspector will go through it. But for you, and kind of how you do it, it seems to me a lot more educational, like as you're going through the process. Can you speak on how you do inspections and kind of what your frame of reference is for doing an inspection with a buyer?
Yeah. Um, Well, not everyone has a knowledge on how a house is built and how it operates, right? So there's a lot of mystery to the average home buyer, to the average home owner. And so I knew that when I was first, trying to buy a house in 2016 or 2015, I think it was. I remember what that felt like. It was very stressful. It was very scary. This is going to be one of the biggest investments of my life. So I took that and I thought, how can I relate to the young home buyer from 2015? How would I be able to meet him or her where they're at? And so, I just made it my goal. Like we mentioned before, communication is key, and that takes a lot of information. And so it just became my goal to educate and empower everyone on being the best homeowner or property owner possible. And so, it's very common in this industry. You get the inspection done and you say, okay, I'm done. You'll get your report within the next 48 hours. I felt like that's not really the best sort of. Doug, you're in the medical industry as well, right?
Yeah, I'm an occupational therapist as well. Yes.
All right. So how do you ever have to, hand over any bad news when it comes to like physical, like when it comes to the human body?
Yeah, I've done, assessments. Typically, they've been, in the pediatric realm, but you do have to deliver, not so great news at times. It's nothing like
Yeah.
a physician, but it's definitely, yes, you tend to be a bearer of some not great news, but then you also like to come with solutions and positivity as well, because no situation is, so bleak that you can't find a little positive nugget in it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a house or a building is kind of built, kind of similar to a human body. There's just a lot of systems and they're all working together. And so when you deliver, my job is to find defects, right? And so when you take a look at all the negative things in the home, when you deliver that news, you also have to deliver it with a bedside manner as well. Is that the right term when it comes to?
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right. Yeah, you have to have some empathy
Yeah.
and some
Absolutely.
understanding about where they're at, like you said, meeting them where they're at, because it is terrifying to get even the best home inspection, because you see this laundry list of things on the inspection, and if you're inexperienced, you don't know what to look for, and you don't know how to separate the like minor little things that are just on the report versus things that are gonna cost you a lot of money down the line. And so every report looks disastrous if it's not interpreted in a way that's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very common to, basically just inform homeowners, home buyers what the defects are, and that's where the communication ends typically in this industry. And that's not very comforting to me. That wasn't
Mm-mm.
comforting to me when I was trying to buy a home, back in 2015. I wanted something more out of that transaction. I wanted more information, and I wasn't unskilled on how to take care of the house. I wasn't provided, the communication.
Yeah.
And so that's what I sought out to achieve is to have the actual conversations. And it's typically frowned upon to have clients at the inspection to ask questions. And in my mind, that's exactly why we're there. We're there to
Yeah.
answer questions because not everyone understands, how a house is built together in full. And, oftentimes I don't know everything myself. And so sometimes I need to ask ask questions. I'm there to answer any questions, to address any concerns, because that is the time for it. That is, instead of just saying there's something wrong with the house. Okay, well, what does that mean? How drastic is it? Is this a minor defect? Is this a major defect? Is this a cataclysmic defect? Ultimately, we're all just concerned with the condition of the home and the health of those occupying those spaces, right? So what does this mean for my wife and kids that I'm moving into this structure? Are we going to be safe? In regard to the investment, is this going to be a good purchase? Or are we going to be looking at appliances, systems, and components that are going to be failing within the X many of years? And then we're looking at a lot of repair costs. And those are things that we need to know when we're buying homes and also when we're sitting on them and maintaining them.
Yeah, and I find it shocking that it's discouraged to have buyers there. And I certainly recommend my buyers to show up just because I know how you operate and I know that that's the value you provide. I have used other inspectors who don't do that, and the experience has just been kind of night and day. And it has been shocking to me that there's not more of that educational component during the process, because the information by itself, if you don't know how to interpret it or you don't have the ability to interact and ask questions, it is confusing. Like, it is, to get an inspection report and just look through it, and if you're the layperson, is a nightmare. Like, it is not, I
Yeah.
mean, it is unbelievable that would happen. And not to get on a soapbox here, but I'm with you where it's shocking to me that is not sort of more of a standard with inspections, to have the ability for the buyer to ask you questions and to give your opinion as much as you can. I know there's limits to that, and that's made apparent on the inspection report. Like, you need to consult a specialist in this area, but this is what I'm seeing. Yeah, shocking. So I
Yeah.
appreciate what you do.
Yeah. I can't say it's my pleasure. I feel I'm often told I should have been a teacher. It's just, I like conveying information. And like I said, I don't know everything. Sometimes it's just passing along information just where it fits.
Yeah. So let's get into some of the things that a buyer should look out for during an inspection. Let's try to separate some of those things that are red flags or something we need to, get some further information about versus like the door is a little sticky, or what are some things that buyers should be looking out for first and foremost in an inspection?
That's a great question. I like the idea of kind of keeping it local to our area because we have a substantial amount of moisture in our area here in the Pacific Northwest. We got a lot of rain. We got a lot of moisture in the air. It's very humid here. Not like the humid in the South, but yeah, we certainly have a lot of water within our area. And so, number one, that is our residential and commercial building enemy. That is the number one threat to our structures. So, the phrase, it all starts at the top. Number one, the roof. That's the first defense against moisture intrusion in our area. And so typically when we see moisture intrusion, it's not just water anymore. We're also looking at conducive conditions for microbial growth, or what we're limited to call mold. And then we're also looking at the relationship of moisture intrusion and wood destroying organisms, whether that is termites, ants, or even rot. So that's what I'm usually on the hunt for the most out of everything in the house, and everything else is kind of, it just kind of pops up in nature. But sometimes you have to look for moisture intrusion. So I think, welcome to the Pacific Northwest. That's one thing that you're going to have to plan to combat on a daily basis. And it's really not that hard. We just got to make sure that we're installing the right materials and that we're maintaining those right materials.
Well, we've seen moisture intrusion through chimneys, like uncapped chimneys is pretty common.
Yeah.
And then via your teaching, it's been eye-opening to see how lumber that touches the ground can soak up water like a straw. So you've recommended just some pretty simple cuts to give some space between some plywood that is, or some wood that is touching the ground in order for it not to like suck up moisture. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that probably pops up on 90% of the homes that I look at. And where that is the garage door opening.
Hmm.
More often than not, it's right there where those lumber materials are making contact with the concrete driveway. And that area is just so prone to not only the deterioration that is caused by a chemical reaction in between the lumber and the concrete, but once that's wet, just from all the rain and all the other saturation, that just accelerates the deterioration process. So typically when I see wood that is making direct contact with concrete, I like to at least recommend that a quarter inch of that would be cleared away, or if there's a way that we can separate the two materials, whether it's metal or some sort of composite material, that would be ideal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
so,
yeah.
go
Do
ahead.
you see a lot of it, water intrusion, also in basements? You said you start at the top. Obviously, the roof is the biggest line of defense. What about any water intrusion in the subterranean living areas or spaces? Is that a big
Absolutely.
concern?
It is a concern. There is a lot of misinformation in regard to moisture in a crawl space. These days, houses are built to allow moisture in a crawl space. So what we don't want is uncontrolled moisture in a crawl space. What that looks like is, let's say, standing water on top of what we call the vapor barrier, that plastic sheet that's down on the grade of the crawl space floor. When we have standing water there, during the warmer seasons, that's going to evaporate into the lumber materials that are important, like your floor structure and other components. But yeah, we often see quite a bit of moisture intrusion, whether that is moisture coming down through the framing of the exterior walls, or, it can soak in through the very fine holes of the concrete stem walls. And then often what gives that away is that there's usually a white film that is found on both surfaces of the concrete stem wall. We call that efflorescence because the water pulls in a lot of the minerals from the nearby grading, and then it just kind of deposits right there on the faces of those concrete structures. That's a first sign that we're seeing moisture and the relationship of moisture kind of seeping into that area. But again, as long as it's controlled and it terminates still from the crawl space, it's still allowable to have water enter in those areas. It's when it's captured and just kind of hangs around there and then again can't evaporate in those areas, then we're starting to see conducive conditions for mold and other damage.
Yeah, stagnant water, never a good thing. You mentioned termites. I've seen rot quite a bit. I've seen termites less. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what pests we should be looking out for, because I've seen rats. I've seen like nesting rodents, basically.
Yeah.
I haven't seen as many termites, but I'm curious if there's like beetles or any other infestation that buyers should be looking for in an inspection.
Yes. Yeah. We have quite a bit of that here. So there is a direct relationship with moisture, water, and moisture damage to lumber materials and wood destroying organisms. So number one, if I think our biggest wood destroying organism threat here in the Pacific Northwest is the Western subterranean termite, as well as the, what would that be? The moisture ants as well.
Oh,
And
yes.
those
Yes.
have a correlation with moisture and moisture damage. So if you have, let's say, wood rot, that's very delicious to a wood destroying organisms. And as you already may know, a wood destroying organism, like an insect, they don't differentiate the dead wood out in the nearby forests and the dead wood that is used to build a home. So what they're looking for is the cellulose of that material. And when it's broken down easier for them, that's when their appetite goes up and they know exactly where to find it. So we do see quite a bit of Western subterranean termites in our area. We see quite a bit of moisture ants. Do see wood boring beetles in our area as well. And typically what happens with those more often than not is that those materials are already installed with those infestations. And more often what they damage the most is the flooring structure, the components that are underneath the floors, like the joists, the girder beams, some of the posts. But those don't hang around as long as, termites and ants do. their reproductive cycle is a little bit, I would say, more marginalized or smaller than what we see with termites and ants. But rot is definitely probably the more popular wood storing organism in our area, just because of the substantial amount of moisture that we have in this area. So
Yeah.
I would be looking out for all of those. Absolutely.
So I'm just curious, with the subterranean termites, are they less likely to be spotted flying around? I'm just thinking, being not an entomologist or expert in those, are they less likely to be like flying around being subterranean, or are they still?
You
I mean,
ask
it's
a
kind of a
great
dumb
question.
question, I guess.
No, that's a great question, because when we think subterranean, we think, coming from the ground, and that's
Yeah.
where they dwell, and that's a lot where they operate. But actually, no, this is the time of the year to be taking a look for what we call swarmers, and they are termites with wings, and they're flying into hard to reach places like attics and crawl spaces, and they're trying to find a safe place to start a colony. And so what they're looking for is their source of food, which is the cellulose and wood. Is there dark, safe conditions? Is there water? And so it's about this time of the year where I see more termite activity than any other time of the year. And that's because these swarmers, the colony starters, they not only are they evident when they're flying around, but also there's a certain point where they shed their wings, and their wings are kind of left all over the flooring throughout the house. There's one house here in our area that stands out in my memory more than any of them, and that's because it was a really cool duplex opportunity over in the Rose Village area. And I remember as soon as I walked into the interiors, there's wings all over the floor. I mean, from one side of the living room to the other, and there's more a concentrated amount around the windows and the crawl space vents. And I thought, well, if they're near the crawl space vents, sorry, not the crawl space vents, the HVAC registers on the floor. If they're near those areas, can they find their way into the crawl space and start attacking the wood structure? Absolutely. And that's what we found. And it was a enormous infestation. They already set up quite a big colony by the time that we saw evidence of their existence. So yeah.
Not the kind of tenants you want in your duplex.
Absolutely no. They're not the best renters.
No, they don't pay. They leave their wings all over the place.
They don't leave their property in the
very
same
noisy
condition in which they got into it. Yeah, yeah.
Terrible. Do not rent to termites. Do not rent to them. I recently heard a story of an agent who will remain unnamed, of course, working with a client who's looking at some new construction. And they sort of dismissed the inspection process. They were kind of like, it's new construction. The inspection's fine. And I just I couldn't believe that either. I fell out of my chair, because I've seen so many new construction things with wacky stuff. And it ended up being that this new construction, they didn't vent the roof properly. They didn't vent it at all. And it caused a bunch of microbial growth in the rafters. And so I wanted to ask your opinion. I mean, spoiler alert, get an inspection on new construction, but what kind of things have you seen in new construction? And why do you need to get an inspection for people who think that maybe it's new, so they don't need an inspection?
Why? That's always a good question. Why is always going to line up with peace of mind. So it's always understanding what your investment or the condition of your investment is. Whether it's new construction or it's been on the block for a long time. I actually just saw a 1980s house earlier this week that is probably in a condition that beat out a lot of new construction in regard to its condition. I was kind of marveling over it. We never see a perfect house. We never see 100 out of 100. There's always something to correct on a house, and that's the fun part of my job. Is I like working with my hands, and I like encouraging people to take care of those things too. But when it comes to new construction, they're certainly not flawless. I have a hard time talking about this topic because I really want to share who does a great job and who does a bad job when it comes to new construction in our area, but I'm not going to go there for the sake of this discussion. I will say that the majority of the defects that I find for new construction, they line up quite a bit on plumbing, roofing, and electrical, if it's not just the cosmetic drywall and the molding or the cabinetry, defects that we find just from unfinished work. So when it comes to plumbing, I've seen a numerous amount of disconnected pipes that when you turn on a faucet, It's just dumping water into the crawl space. Same thing to be said with the drainage systems. When I find defects in the plumbing system on a new construction house, I think I found more broken drain pipes than anything else. So I always recommend, even though it's new construction, get a sewer scope, because what's happening is when they're constructing this new house, and they're driving the gradles and the forklifts on the gravel driveway at that time, they're not really concerned about what's underneath that gravel, and the weight of those heavy machineries are down on top of those ABS plastic pipes and cracking them. So I think it was last year I counted, it was a number of 17 drains that I inspected, and they were caved in from the top. There's gravel inside of the drain pipe that goes all the way out to the city sewer. And it's shocking because it's like, this is brand new. How did we get here? Well, we're not paying enough attention to what we're doing as we're installing these houses. And if, I cringe every time I hear it, and it's not uncommon, the recommendation to waive the home inspection or skip the home inspection because it's brand new material. It's a brand new construction. What could go wrong? A lot can go wrong. And I'm not here to scare anybody. Yeah. And I'm not here to scare anybody or, to make this sound more intimidating than how it should be. But, along with a home inspection, I always recommend, even though it's new construction, to do a sewer scope, even a radon test.
Yeah.
Fun fact. In 2015, Washington requires all high-risk areas to have new construction builds have a radon reduction or ventilation pipe installed. What that looks like is a black 6-inch pipe that goes from the crawl space, and it's nice and sealed underneath that vapor barrier. And then it extends through the framing of the house, and then it terminates above the roof. What it looks like is just another standard plumbing stack vent. But what that's designed to do is take any potential radon gas through that pipe and then just terminate it directly above the house, and it dissipates in the oxygen of the open air. But what happens if that's not installed correctly, right? So sometimes contractors and the subcontractors are in a rush and trying to meet deadlines, and sometimes those things get skipped. I've counted already just this year 20 pipes that were not installed correctly. So if those are not regulating radon gas, could there be a radon gas intrusion into our houses? Yes, absolutely. So
you think with them having, you could be mistaken to think because they're installed, of course they're installed correctly and I have it, so it's not an issue, so I'm not going to get a test, which would be a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. And also, radon's not just in the basement. Is another thing that I've learned. I've seen high radon in single story homes, like ground level homes. So that's also something I've learned throughout, working with Jared and getting home inspections, is to don't skip on the sewer scope. I've seen that before. Amazing. Don't do it. Don't skip on the radon, because those, if they are damaged or if there is radon, those are two concessions that sellers are typically going to give because their livability, their health and safety and livability. And so you're going to find a lot of sellers amenable to giving you credits for correcting those things, because they're going to have to do them anyway. They're going to have to disclose it and they're going to have to correct them. So I think it's safe to say to always get a sewer scope and a radon test. And it's really not that much. I did some content about getting not only an inspection, but also getting, especially if there's indications of any other further damage, specialized inspections on the chimney or the HVAC or different areas where you might need a more thorough look. Is that something that you recommend as well? Because the inspection is as good of a job as you do. It's not meant to be a thorough inspection on every component of the home.
Correct. Yeah. So home inspectors can be as thorough as possible, but we're still limited. That we still have limitations, as you brought up earlier in this discussion. We're limited to a visible only inspection, which means that we're not permitted or even licensed or insured to take off materials and take a look at the deeper things of the house. So a chimney is a really good one. We do our best to take a look at not only the construction of the chimney, how it's flashed and how it penetrates the roof. We want to take a look at the way it sheds water away from the top of the chimney, so we're not getting water into the firebox and also the other neighboring components and materials. We also want to take a look at the flue, but we can't see everything about that chimney flue unless we have the proper technology. There's a guy that I know in Colorado, he buys two separate sewer scope cams. One's for sewer, one's for chimneys. And it's just a matter of dropping that little camera down the chimney to get a good look at, exactly how that flue looks from the top to the bottom. But, again, we are limited to things that we cannot see. And that's really hard for me personally because, coming from contracting and construction, I really want to take things apart. I really want to get to the bottom of why we're seeing staining in the drywall, why we're seeing cracks in the foundation. I want to see what more in that story we can tell so that we can provide more information. But at that point, the best we can do is just document what we're seeing, kind of explain what this could mean in regard to the relationship of the rest of the house, and then also what the recommendation or what the correction would be. So typically it usually lands on just recommending evaluation from a licensed professional contractor that is specialized in the construction of that material or that system, because ultimately, even though we're very thorough, we're not specialists. I hate saying this out loud sometimes, but we're really just generalists. We're looking at visible only, so we can't get too specialized anyway. But we're just looking at, damage. We're looking at defects, and we're looking at what is causing that, what could happen if we leave that alone. But really, the best people to have the conversation on what to do about it is really the contractors and those tearing material types apart and fixing the problem.
Yeah, well, you're pointing an educated and experienced finger at a potential problem that needs more assessment. And I feel like people should get that assessment. And I've often felt this too, where it's like, oh, you've already spent all this money on the inspection and okay, you've got this indication. I would recommend that people do take that step, and it's tempting to skip it. But if you see indications of that damage or something that like the chimney where you just can't get, you can't see the inside, you can't see the flue, to have somebody come out and look at that as well, because it's going to be well worth the, $200 you pay for that inspection. It could save you thousands. And so when an inspector like you does the good job of pointing out the signs of something that needs more inspection, you need to listen and really invest in that, I think, because it could be a lot of damage. It could be something significant. And so I think that it's worth it to get those other inspections. Is there something that you see, like you notice quite a bit, that buyers don't pay attention to? Is there something that like we may not know about? Like I think most people like realize the roof's important, like the HVAC and checking all that and the structure. Is there anything that you see commonly that maybe a buyer wouldn't have as much knowledge about or be looking at, especially in Vancouver?
That's a good question. That's a
You
great
did mention
question.
radon, so that I feel like that's kind of region specific because we are in sort of an overall higher radon area here. So that's
Clark
one of
County.
them for sure. Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's something that you see that maybe buyers don't always think about.
Not to reiterate too much, but sewer scopes tends to be that issue quite a bit. Then you're basically just, if you're not getting that sewer scope, you're waiving that liability of sewer problems, and they're not too unusual.
Yeah.
Especially with the older parts of town. And we're looking at older materials. We're looking at older connections, and not everything is built to last forever. Let's say we're looking at the houses that were constructed in the 1930s, 1940s. Let's just say in the Fruit Valley area, the Rose Village area, the milling neighborhoods were booming, and they're popping these houses up, all using the same material types all throughout these neighborhoods. We're looking at a lot of concrete pipes that have seen some grading, shifting movements. We're also looking at trees that have been planted in the area. Those roots are now getting further and further into the ground, and they're looking for water, or I guess we can say that safely. They're looking for water, and they're going to try and find it as much as possible, which means they might be cracking open some pipes and trying to reach in what's in there, right? So it's, it's often ignored, and sometimes it takes a further discussion. Jared, would you recommend that we do a sewer scope? Yeah, absolutely. Because we can't see anything from the ground. We can't see anything from the house. The best way that we can get a look at how the sewer drain or septic system, or let me back up, the pipe that goes to the septic system is operating and what the condition is. Sometimes we're just scheduled for a home inspection and that's it. And that's great. I'm glad that they're getting that information about that really large investment. And then the question is, how is the plumbing system? Well, what we can see is, there's this, and it's doing great here. We're looking at older pipes here, which means that we're probably looking at older drain pipes as well. Have you considered about, doing a sewer scope inspection? No, actually I didn't. I wasn't informed by my real estate agent that we should. So we need to be talking about this more on a bigger scale on why that's important, because what we're looking at a very middle cost of repairing sewer drain issues is roughly, I want to say, $10,000 to $15,000, because there's a lot of work that goes. It's not just
Uh-huh.
connecting pipes together. Sometimes you have to rip up the asphalt in the road.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to rip up the concrete sidewalk. Then you have to hire in, the proper experience to shore the grading so it doesn't cave in on anyone working down below. Sometimes we see pipes that are 8 to 12 feet down below the surface of the ground. A lot of that takes experience. A lot of that takes more work. So it's not as easy as just going to Home Depot and just buying the right part, connecting it yourself. We're looking at some pretty expensive repairs.
Yeah, we just looked at that 100-year-old place, and it had the disjointed sewer pipe where it was made out of like clay. It was clay pipe or concrete and PVC, and it was like separate, disjointed by a few inches. And I got the estimate, and it was like $9,000. So tell me
Yeah.
you're not going to get a sewer scope and then just find that out later, and then you got to drop that money for the sewer repair when you could have negotiated that from the
Yeah.
sellers. So the not getting a sewer scope or not knowing about it or not telling your clients about it, again, falling out of my seat, because that's not good. So it's not like some superfluous upsell that you're trying to do. It saves you tons of money, and it's like an extra $150 or whatever. Yes, please do it.
And
Get that sewer scope.
I'll tie it back to, I like it when you make analogies in between health and property maintenance as well. So you did a great piece on galvanized pipes the other day. I really like that one. But why do we go to the doctors? Why do we have discussions with the health specialist? It is to stay proactive, because it's easier to handle problems, whether it's the human body or a house. It's easier to handle problems before they how do I say this correctly? It's easier to handle it proactively than reactively, right? So it's easier to handle something when it's just about to break or showing signs of damage, compared to when it's just full-blown damaged and now it's imminent that we repair it. So because oftentimes it's not just the material that's damaged that we need to fix, it's almost everything neighboring it or installed around it as well. So
Right, they're
yeah,
all connected.
absolutely.
Amazingly. Well, Jared, where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram. You guys have a website. I'm going to link this all down in the description, of course. But where can people find you? Because you do some good content too. I love your stuff on Instagram.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to chain a little bit of humor into it, because home buying is intimidating enough. And it's not all just doom and gloom. I like that. I have fun doing my job, and I really want to provide that for every inspection as well. I want you to have fun buying the house. I want you to have fun looking at the house with me. And so that's what I try to portray in my social media. But yeah, you can find me just about anywhere: Instagram, Facebook. I just found out that I'm on Yelp and what was
Yeah,
it?
great.
Reddit. I didn't know that, but you can find me there too.
Okay.
But the best way to find me would be on the website at bearhomeinspection.com. That's where I write actively blogs to keep my community informed about home or property maintenance and just ownership in general.
Yeah.
Again, because I want you to stay informed. I want you to be able to handle things proactively. And then also, that's the best way to schedule a home inspection with me. I make it really easy. You can schedule all of that online. I think last time I timed it is, if you're really in a pinch, you can get it done within 2 to 3 minutes.
Wow, yeah, that's another thing. Like a lot of like service-oriented home businesses don't have is like an easy way to schedule or like a modern digital presence. So you're ahead of the game, and you do a great job. And I want to thank you, Jared, for all that you do, and look forward to working with you. You just do a great job with clients. So I'm happy to have you on the team.
Thank you, Doug.
And thanks for being on the show, Eddie.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, take care, everybody.